The abundance of resources in one's land does not always equate to having abundant access to said resources. The villagers and natives of the Himalayan regions in India felt what restricted access and privatization of their resources is like. Despite villagers depending on forests for food, fuel, water purification, soil stabilization, and lumber in general, the government of India took ownership of this land and limited its accessibility to the villagers. Thus, although the end of the Sino-Indian conflict in 1963 brought growth and development across the Himalayas, the predominant beneficiaries became government entities and private companies, leaving villagers of these regions isolated from their own resources and shut off from conversations on how to protect the forests. However, as the government continued to overstep its control over these regions by advancing government-backed logging, the local villagers challenged them via non-violent Gandhian-style protest of hugging trees to stop them from being cut. Thus, in 1973, the Chipko movement was born. For the villagers of the Himalayan regions in India, the forests have always been an essential part of their livelihoods, especially because the forests were fully free to be accessed by people up until 1821. However, due to the development era that grew after the Sino-Indian conflict, the government implemented various policies that prevented the villagers from managing the lands and denied them access to the lumber. In between this action by the government and other injustices in this region, activists began rising to protest these policies. Activists such as Chandi Prasad Bhatt established a DGSM in 1964, which was an organization that opposed large-scale industry and set out to help unskilled and semi-skilled construction workers in the Garhwal region of Uttar Pradesh to obtain employment. Slowly, demonstrations began spreading across the Himalayas, and in 1971 there was a pivotal demonstration by villagers in Gopeshwar against the forest policies of the government, and the denied request by the Forest Department for the DGSM to obtain 10 ash trees for its farm tools workshop and necessities. Meanwhile, the government accepted the Simon Company's, a sporting goods manufacturer in distant Allahabad's, request for cutting down 300 trees to be used for making tennis and badminton rackets. Protests and community organized debates among villagers in the Simon Company continued over the years until 1973, when a big protest with hundreds of people broke out after the Simon Company began its plans to cut down the trees. Hundreds took to the streets from Gopeshwar to Mandal with drums and singing to protest the Simon Company, successfully ending their presence in the region. And on the other hand, in that same year, a protest broke out near the Mandal village in Alakana Valley, as the government denied the villagers' appeal to stop all Simon Company logging in exchange for their access to lumber. Thus, to be heard, the villagers established what later became their signature and most powerful tool: hugging. Dozens of villagers, mainly women, began hugging trees to protest the government logging, beginning the initiation of the Chipko movement. Chipko meaning to hug or to cling to in Hindi. Women led the front lines of the Chipko movement as the movement spread through the Himalayan regions. Despite the involvement of men in the movement, women took charge of conversations and building grassroots efforts to stop the government's overreach of their land and degradation of the environment. In the Himalayan regions, women were the main ones responsible for cultivating crops for their families, protecting livestock, and caring for their young children. Thus, the environmental disasters that came with logging, such as landslides and floods, began greatly affecting the lives of these women and their families, leading them to step up to the front lines to demand change and call for an end to any cutting of trees. Women not only led protests via hugging trees, they also actively participated and led meetings with Chipko workers, led processions, and established awareness programs for their communities, leading them to a breakthrough with men to reach the decision-making table in the Chipko movement that they originally were forbidden from. Women such as Wara Devi were key figures in spreading the Chipko movement into more villages, as she did in her village Rani. Throughout the increased participation of women in the Chipko movement, women in these regions began improving their leadership, started breaking down patriarchal norms, and successfully ignited a new generation of activism and openness to allow women to participate in it. Despite this movement being led by strong and powerful women, it wasn't born from a Western feminist philosophy, but rather it was born simply by a genuine urge by women to fight the environmental degradation by the government and its injustices that were affecting their families and community. And as the author Shruti Singh highlights, and I quote, "The participation of women in the Chipko movement serves as a reminder that environmental activism is not just a matter of protecting nature, but also about social justice, gender equality, and human rights." End quote. The Chipko movement demonstrated two things. One, how historic factors can lead to the eventual cause for environmental degradation, and two, how silenced communities can become the most powerful people to create effective change. This powerful woman-led movement was only the beginning of the many other Chipko movements that erupted around the world, in places like Sweden and Japan, while retaining a strong presence in India. As in 2017, a group of young boys and girls enacted Chipko protests in West Bengal. The Chipko movement not only brought up activists who continue fighting for environmental justice, such as Dr. Vandana Shiva, but it also inspired activists from around the world, such as Wangari Maathai in Kenya and Julia Butterfly Hill in California. Overall, the Chipko movement not only showed the power of a united people to fight injustices, but it also showcased the unique courage, strength, and dedication of women to fight to protect the environment and vulnerable communities. The work of the Chipko woman will live on as an inspiration for many decades and centuries to come.